So, welcome everybody. I'm so thrilled to bring you my colleague and dear friend, Dr. Cynthia Phelps. She is a Stanford Ambassador of Compassion, an international speaker, certified mindfulness instructor, and founder of InnerAlly, which is a trauma-informed company building tools, courses, and mobile apps to improve mental wellness based on the science of self-compassion. She has extensive experience in learning and behavior change and has been developing mental health tools since 2009. Her expertise is in helping people, including me, use their own inner voice as their superpower to get what they want out of life. Her background is in pharmacology, neuroscience, and it helps her create programs and products for effective health behavior change. Dr. Cynthia started InnerAlly after having a profound recovery experience with implementing self-compassion in her own life, and she now facilitates live and online trainings as well as private programs to help others make their own breakthroughs. InnerAlly celebrates the power of creating a kind and supportive inner voice to change your life for the better. And I'm super excited to show you. So she's one of the genius moves that Dr. Cynthia has done was to create these InnerAlly cards. And so once a month or more often, if I need it, I go to this deck and choose a card to work with. And it's always right on for what I'm going through currently. And currently, I'm going through some physical challenges, and I'm also caregiver for my husband, who's recovering from a significant series of injuries with his bicycle accident. And the one that I most recently chose is the companion. And the companion InnerAlly is, I am there for you as a loyal, trusted friend who will not mistreat or abandon you. I support you to create stable, healthy relationships. And at this point, I'm creating a relationship with my body that involves less doing and more being, which is not comfortable for me. So anyway, I love having these cards to play with and to help me mitigate the inner critic and mitigate some of these really harsh inner voices. So, Dr. Cynthia, I know because we share the common experience that we have both suffered with addiction. And as I've shared with you, my own disordered relationship with food, I was 5 years in to that experience, 5 years of really severe disordered eating and other behaviors, and around just controlling how I looked. And it took me 5 years, 5 long years coming out of that addiction. And when I took your first class and was exposed to InnerAlly, the light bulb went on that if I had had this, it would have been a fast track. It would have been so much easier. Yes, I would have still needed therapy, but it would have been so much faster for me. So I'm wondering if we can just jump into your story and how this all developed.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me, and what a fun story to hear about how you're using the inner allies. And my experience was alcohol was the thing that I was misusing. And I had been misusing it for a while, like probably on and off for maybe 10 years. And it was totally a coping mechanism to get through a very difficult emotional experience, a lot of grief and loss, a lot of loss. And I realized that I had a problem, and I put myself into rehab. I did an outpatient rehab, and I was still working at the time. And I went through all the steps and I sent all the directions and I did all the things. And it did not address my core problem. And one of the core problems that I did not know at the time was a core problem was that I was deeply ashamed of myself. I was deeply ashamed of some of the decisions I'd made, and deeply ashamed of not being able to fully control my use of alcohol. And so even though I went through rehab, I only stayed sober or without drinking alcohol for about 8 months or something like that. And then I was determined to be a normal person again.
Oh dear.
And I was met with very limited success at that. Sometimes successful, but the sometimes not part was just so deeply painful, with a lot of rebound anxiety and depression. And I was in this state actually when I was first introduced to the concept of being kind to myself. And I was reading a magazine and it had an article about a researcher named Dr. Kristen Neff. And at the time, she was like the premier researcher in self-compassion and explained what self-compassion was and what type of research she did and some of the benefits of self-compassion. And it was like the clouds parted and like this little sunbeam came down on me, and it was like, oh, like this is what you're missing. This is what your curriculum for recovery was missing. And that's when I really began to understand that shame was a key component that was holding me back from my recovery. And so like at that moment I immediately decided, like, I was diving into this head first. And like a true academic, I think it took me like a few months of reading every research article about it and everything I could find before I realized I actually had to practice the thing.
Right.
And so,
Right.
right.
Hmm.
And so I was, oh, right, okay, I have to practice. And I began taking classes in self-compassion. And eventually I was on the track to be a certified teacher of mindful self-compassion. And I was pretty close to the end of that process. So I was like the last day of certified teacher training. I still had to do hours and things like that, but the last day of formal instruction. And I was kind of sitting, kind of kicked back, like, okay, I know everything about everything of self-compassion. I've read all the research, I've read all the books. And at that point, you actually could have. I don't think you could do that today because there's so much research out there.
Right.
But then Dr. Neff was actually teaching the course at the time, and she began to tell a story that she kind of talks about a little bit in her book. And she has a son who's autistic, and they were in Trader Joe's, like, or some other grocery store like that, shopping. And her son, I think, was about 10 at the time, and he had an autistic meltdown. And it was, if you've never seen one of those, it's kind of red-faced on the floor, kicking, screaming. There's, as a parent, your job is to not get hurt yourself and to kind of just ride it out, right? And so she's sitting there like with the grocery cart, like with everybody looking at her, and she modeled in class for us her inner voice in that moment. And she put her hand over her heart and she said, "Oh, darling, this is so hard. I'm sorry you're having to go through this." And I remember my head like just exploded because I was like, what? That's how you talk to yourself? Like, you can do that? And I realized in that moment, I was missing this fundamental piece of self-compassion, which is how you relate to yourself on the inside, your inner voice. And actually, that was the birth of the grandmother, because her voice sounded just like the grandmother to me. And like, not my grandmother, but like the avatar grandmother,
Right.
everybody's best qualities of grandmother wrapped into one. And so that was the very first idea that I had for creating the Inner Allies. And then later on, I developed some more, pulled together some more research to help define people's emotional needs and then attach them to ways that we can speak to ourselves compassionately.
Wow. Wow. Well, let me just say, I so appreciate all the research that this represents. It's been, I've sent this off to some of my clients. Like, it's been such a powerful tool to help me, because like you, my grandmother didn't sound like that. My parents and grandparents were surviving, and they made some wonderful choices that had some profoundly positive results in our lives, some things I'm so grateful for. And there was trauma for my parents growing up, and there was trauma for me and my siblings growing up. And and like you described, when you heard her say darling and speak to herself so kindly, you you weren't hardwired for that kind of um, inner self-compassion, nor was I. And so I think that's one of the reasons I went down that slippery slope into addiction. And if I had had this tool, I think it's something that could really help people make big improvements in their lives very quickly. So, um, so that was for you, that was back in the early 2000s, that experience.
That experience would have been, so I first found the research in self-compassion in late 2012.
Oh,
And,
okay.
and then I think I was in that teacher training 2015.
Okay. Okay. So talk to me about what you're doing now with this, with the self-compassion, with what you've learned and how you're doing it. Because I know I've attended some live classes. I am signed up to attend an online class. Um, Talk to us about what you're doing now and how you're delivering what has helped you and so many of your private clients.
Sure. Well, I have been a researcher by training, which you heard in my bio. And so one of the very first things I did is I really wanted to know if addiction was correlated with self-compassion. And so I published a small pilot study in 2017 that actually showed this correlation. And so I think there's been a lot more work done since then that is really showing the relationship between self-compassion and this kind of addictive cycle. And from my perspective, it's kind of a chicken and egg problem, because if you are not compassionate to yourself, that is a risk factor for addiction. But also being stuck in the cycle of addiction
In the
where
loop.
you are self-harming,
Yes.
that is the opposite of self-compassion. And so that means that you are practicing the opposite of self-compassion. And so it's very much this self-reinforcing downward spiral in if you don't have a kind of self-compassion intervention. And so that was the first thing that I did, was I wanted to get some research out there into the scientific literature. And then I just went and created what I really would have wanted to have back when I was working on my own recovery.
Yeah.
And so what I did was I took the years that I was at a faculty at the University of Texas studying technology and also like how to change people's behavior. I collaborated a lot with our School of Public Health. And I've combined it with what I know about self-compassion and some of the tools that come from this area of essentially positive psychology. And so in this course that you're signed up for, that's happening in January, that is like a culmination of all of the things that I have learned and put together to create a way for people to, I'm calling it release the habit, but it's really about changing your own behavior to be what you want it to be. And so sometimes that means you need to release, almost always it means you have to release something. But it also means sometimes you want to pull in some new habits and create some new habits. And so that's all really tightly woven together. And so I'm excited about this class in January because it is going to be a 3-month course, which means that we have like some luxurious time to learn and to practice and to play. And I think that it's very different from some of the things that you see every January, right? Which is like, we're going to teach you how to crush it and quit smoking, or we're going to teach you like, how to finally lose weight by, being really hard on yourself. And, I mean, they don't advertise it quite like that, but like, it's this mindset of you're going to pull yourself up by your bootstraps and you're going to whip yourself into shape. And like, this is all violent language, right? And so this, by contrast, is compassionate. And, so sometimes people think, well, compassion is weakness.
Right.
But that is just the opposite of what the research has told us over the last 20 years. Like, we know that people who are self-compassionate are stronger, they're more resilient, they have higher levels of well-being. We know that they're better able to change their own behaviors. Especially, it's been studied in the arena of health behavior change when you're looking at things like quitting smoking or starting a new diet routine or starting a new exercise routine. It's the people who can encourage themselves with kindness that are long-term successful.
Yeah. And I will say that 20 plus years ago now, when I first began studying the space clearing and personal clearing, when I trained with Eric Dowsett from Australia, it was the first time I was ever introduced to this concept of, the yogis call it neutral mind, having no resistance to whatever's happening and having no attachment to, pulling your desired reality toward you and just dropping all that and coming into a place of unconditional compassion. So 20 years ago, and I did make big improvements. Like, my personality changed, little bit. When I came into contact with InnerAlly, it was like light bulbs went on in so many ways. Partly because you use the word avatar, I might actually use the word archetype, because these different identities that we could be in, the grandmother, the king, the lover, the saint, the knight, the artist, these are like archetypes. Whatever language you speak, whatever culture you're in, these identities kind of have a constant, and you give them a voice and messages. And so when I recognize, when I pull one of these cards and I recognize, oh, wow, what if this was the voice that was reinforcing, releasing the old, whatever aspect of the old identity I really feel complete with, or calling in some new up-leveling, some new expansion. And so you mentioned earlier that the idea of releasing the old parts of the self and calling in the new are kind of woven together. And so, and you've talked to us about how self-compassion is now proven. Like 20 years ago, when I first started that training, there wasn't any science on this. Some of the science I've learned from you, but some of it is out there. You can read about it. But yeah, talk to us about how the science of self-compassion can be implemented in a way that helps us release something we feel complete with and prepare ourselves or move toward the part of ourselves that we want. Like, because that's really what we're talking about is behavior change, not just changing this or changing this, but we're talking about an arc of real behavior change.
That's right. So behavior change, I'm sure you've probably heard of like the stages of change model. I mean, it's very common. It's been around for a long time. And this is kind of a generalized model of kind of the things that people go through when they try to change something. And it's generic. It's different. It's not different for individuals. What's interesting about InnerAlly is that you can get your own InnerAlly profile. So you can kind of find your InnerAlly team, if you will. And so the barriers to change, there's a lot of them, like environmental barriers, cost barriers, but the thing that holds most of us back on the inside of us, our own barriers, our own thought processes, our own voices telling us we can't do it or whatnot. And those have some individualization to them. It falls into some categories, and those happen to be the categories of the inner allies. And so really what I can do with clients and what we're going to be doing in this class is we're going to be going through a questionnaire, which really helps you to understand what's holding you back. How are you holding yourself back? And then we can look specifically for you, Melody, what language and what allies are going to be the best ones to support you in the behavior change. Because what it does is kind of reaches into your core and finds out what you really need and what you really want out of life. And then it gives you language to support that. And so it's more targeted than kind of a general behavior change approach.
Ah, beautiful. Well, I'm wildly excited about the 3-month program because from my perspective, it takes at least 12 weeks. When you set out to make a change in your lifestyle, or whether it's physical health, mental health, social, it doesn't matter. When you set out to make a change, minimum 12 weeks. So, talk to us about where we can find out more information about that. And I'm going to put the links as well.
Sure. Well, you can find most everything at InnerAlly.com, and that's INNERALLY.com. And the course and the training is there under Release the Habit. You can click on that and learn all about that course. And I'm always open for questions if people want to learn more about my work. On the coaching page of my website, you can sign up for the 30-minute free consultation after you fill out an intake form. And so that's like a great way, like if you have an idea about something that you might want to change, is it appropriate for the course or is it appropriate for some, one-on-one sessions with me? Then that's a really great way to get access to me and to get on my calendar.
So, so this brings up another question. And because I've seen you in live classes and I've seen you teach online and facilitate, let's make it clear that these sessions are not just lecture.
Oh gosh, that's a great point. It's so like I just assume that everybody knows that because I stopped just lecturing so many years ago. And it actually was a culture shift for me, coming out of being a professor, right?
Right.
so, right. So even though, we're spending a significant time online together, there are going to be practices where we're actually putting some of these skills into practice together as a group. There is going to be movement. There is going to be sharing of experience. One of the things, particularly when you're trying to change behaviors, it can feel very isolating. It can feel like I'm the only one that can't figure this out. And so one of the great things about Zoom is that we can break up into groups and we can have, some conversations, and then we can kind of report back to the larger group, like what kind of nuggets do you want to share about your own behavior change journey and about your goals and whatnot. And so it's really going to be a nice combination of different modalities. And so and there's nothing that I hate more than having to sit still for a training for hours in front of Zoom. So I am not going to do that to anyone.
So, so do we want to talk about your practice sessions, your Tuesday night practice sessions? Are you going to be doing that ongoing?
Well, they're ending in November. And
Okay,
so I am probably going to start something up in the new year. I'm not sure exactly what that's going to look like. And I definitely am going to have them catering to the folks who are in the class.
got it.
And so the topics, normally for the topics for my Tuesday night practice sessions, well, the format of it is like I talk for about 10 minutes on a topic. And then we actually do a practice together, a mindfulness practice for maybe 10, 15 minutes. Very gentle, very beginner, very welcoming. And then we chat about like what just happened. And so this is just a very consistent practice format that I found that people really get a lot out of. And so oftentimes I choose the topics like, I know this isn't going to air until December, but we're right before Thanksgiving and our topic is about triggers. Before we go into family Thanksgiving. So I usually pick kind of timely topics
Yes.
that and they're always kind of related back to the core of what I teach. And so I suspect in January you can look for a new series of the compassion practice group, and it's going to dovetail with what we're doing with the behavior change.
So will there be a way when people go to InnerAlly.com to get on your list and find out about all of that? Is there a
Sure,
way?
you can
Yeah,
always join the mailing list, and I have a mailing list where I send out. It's usually I send out about every month or so. Occasionally, it'll go out twice a month. Occasionally, it won't go out.
right,
So I think the short take home there is I don't spam anyone.
right,
You're not going to
right.
get a ton of emails from me, but I do like to keep people up on what courses are coming up. And the way that I use Eventbrite for the recurring practice group events. And so I run series of events because I found that Eventbrite, if you like have too many events in a row, like it just starts to malfunction. And so I'll put forward a new series and then direct everybody to that series link, and then you Eventbrite will notify you like, oh, there's another one coming up.
Okay, and so in January, from January, 3 months till March,
That's right,
um,
end of March.
the end of March, we'll be meeting on Thursday nights, is it?
Yep.
Thursday nights, Eastern. So, and we will be going through this sort of scientifically based behavior change process to release the habit you prefer to let go of and create a new one, correct?
Sure. And it is scientifically based, but I'm not going to necessarily be teaching you science. I'm going to tell you enough science so that you understand why we're doing what we're doing. And then if you want to read more, I can provide a reading list, but it's definitely not a science class.
That's good to know, because if I thought it was, I would not have signed up for it. Yeah, no, I've seen you teach before, and I know it's scientifically based. I know I'm getting someone who understands the latest research, and it's experiential. So I'm going to have an
Exactly.
experience that is going to help me make the changes I want to make. And you know what I find is so interesting is that it doesn't matter at what level of education or skill or maturity we are at, all of us need support. And
Mm-hmm.
the InnerAlly is all about creating internal support. And I found, at least with many things, I also need external support. So this class is going to be perfect for
Community
me.
is so important. Yes,
Yes.
community is a key factor. And I think it's also interesting to point out that it doesn't matter, like if you've been through a recovery journey, you can start again. Because there's always, I don't know about you, but there's always things in my life where I'm thinking to myself, like, okay, now what do I want to like dust off and make better, right? And
Right.
so oftentimes I volunteer a lot in a recovery group called She Recovers, which is a recovery for women identifying. And there we talk about, you know, peeling the onion of recovery, like taking another layer off, because oftentimes when we make a big change in our behavior, maybe give up alcohol or quit smoking or whatever, we become aware of what was underneath that coping mechanism, you know, what needed to be attended to, right?
Right.
And so it you can be in any layer of the onion and benefit from this process.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, beautiful. Well, I am just so excited. I cannot wait to share you, you and this with my community. And just, I'm recommending people follow you, pay attention, attend your courses, attend your free practice sessions, because wherever we are, whatever stage of life we're in, whether we are working with our physical bodies to improve our health and vitality, whether we're working with the body of the home to clear the clutter and improve the flow of chi, or whether we're involved in a community effort, we all need this to rehabilitate our consciousness out of
Mm.
the harshness that many of us grew up with, and the colonization and the patriarchalization that many of us grew up with, into something supportive and partnering.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And you know that is so important, because this work is really built on what people would call a feminine type of an energy. And the compassion is traditionally thought of as a feminine energy, but then it's important to know, for people to know that it's not just nurturing compassion that's going to help you on this path in this course, but we're also going to cover fierce compassion,
Yes.
and how, you know, saying no and setting boundaries, and, you know, being and getting yourself up off the couch to do what you need to do. Like this is yeah, there you go, security. And so both of these energies come to the table to help out with how you want to move through life in a new way.
Yes, yes, exactly. Well, thank you so much, Cynthia. I cannot wait for this to start in January. So I'm just really excited to share this. Thanks so much.
It's an honor to be here.